Assalamu alaikum. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. It's an honor to join you to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the Shura Council, to recognize the work that's been done and the challenges that lie ahead. Thank you so much for welcoming us into your beautiful community. When I think of this milestone, I think about all of the people in this room and those who are not in this room, who built this community quietly, without credit or spotlight. People who gave their time and money, who worked long hours for the sake of Allah, so that their children and grandchildren could have a strong foundation to stand on. I grew up in a family that believed that faith wasn't just about worship. It was about having a moral conscience that grounded you. My parents taught me that belief means taking risks for what's right, even if it comes at a cost. That lesson has guided me my entire life, and it feels especially heavy right now. Because while we have so much to celebrate, as far as how far the American Muslim community has come, we're living through a moment that has shaken many of us to the core. For 2 years, we watched the people of Gaza endure the unimaginable, as they were subjected to a genocide that was live streamed to the entire world. For 2 years, we watched as they endured relentless terror from the sky, the ground, the sea, in the homes they built, in the tents they were forced to live in, even in their hospital beds. Words fail in the face of this horror. How do we get over watching children starve to death? People who once lived in dignity reduced to begging for food, reduced to skin and bones, shadows of their former selves. The crimes are too unbearable to comprehend. We've seen people buried alive under rubble, screaming for help, countless photos of beheaded children, of shredded bodies. We've seen unimaginable graphic images that will never be erased from our minds. And yet, amid the horror, we saw something that should strengthen the heart of every believer. The unshakable faith of a people who refuse to let go of sabr and tawakkul, patience and trust in Allah. I'll never forget a video that I watched at the beginning of the genocide in October 2023. 2 young brothers in the aftermath of an Israeli airstrike. The older one, whose face was stained with blood, stood over his younger brother, no more than 10 years old. His younger brother, his head was bandaged and his face and chest covered in blood. The older boy, no more than 10, was whispering to his younger brother to say the Shahada. At the time, the video struck me because I could see my own children in those 2 boys. I couldn't imagine the presence of mind and the strength it took for a boy that young to realize that his beloved sibling was dying and that he had to say the Shahada at that moment. So many videos and stories like that followed, day after day, month after month, until we reached 2 years. My documentary program, Fault Lines, on Jazeera English, recently released a documentary called The Killing Field, investigating the murder of starved Palestinians while they tried to get food from the so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, US and Israeli-backed aid sites, which Palestinians came to call death traps. We covered the story of Reem Zaidan, a 45-year-old mother of 7 who walked miles trying to get food, only to be shot in front of 2 of her children. 26 others were also killed with her. Her son Ahmed had turned 13 just days earlier. In an interview, he told our team in Gaza, I told her, Mom, if you can hear me, take the Shahada. Say the Shahada, Mom. My program made another documentary on a 13-year-old girl named Layan Al-Ata, who's a child amputee from Gaza who came to the US for treatment. Israel has created the largest cohort of pediatric amputees in modern history due to its brutal attacks in Gaza. Layan lost her leg in an attack that targeted a masjid. Shrapnel from the minaret fell outside of her family's tent while she was playing. When Layan realized that her injured leg had been amputated, she panicked and screamed at her mother and at the medical staff, who took her leg without telling her. She cried for a long time. Her mother tried to calm her down and told her, "I will be your hands, I will be your legs." It was this realization that finally allowed Layan to accept her new reality. She said, quote, "I thought this is God's will, and we need to be patient. I believe God will reward me for this loss, and hopefully my leg will be in heaven." I also think about Radwan Abu Muammar. He was 22 years old when the Israeli military bombed his family's home in Gaza on December 21st, 2003, killing his parents, siblings, and 9-year-old niece, Tala. Overall, they killed more than 30 people in that attack. Radwan survived under the rubble. He gathered the remains of his family members and buried them in one grave. Radwan says in the moment he saw his family's bodies, a verse from the Quran came to him. And I'm going to read the verses in English for the purposes of time. From Surah At-Tawbah, quote, "Indeed, Allah has purchased from the believers their lives and their wealth. For that they will have paradise." And these verses from Surah Al-Baqarah also came to mind for him. "And surely we will test you with fear and hunger and loss of wealth and lives and fruits. But give good tidings to the patient who, when disaster strikes them, say, 'Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un.' Indeed, we belong to Allah, and indeed to Him we will return. Those are the ones upon whom are blessings from their Lord and mercy, and it is those who are rightly guided." I met Radwan in Istanbul earlier this year, where he's now raising his 13-year-old cousin Shahab, who lost his parents in the same attack. In the aftermath of the genocide, Palestinians who've lost their families are constituting new families, raising each other, being there for each other. Is that not the ultimate act of hope and faith? We've lost count of the videos we've seen from Gaza of Palestinians covered in dust or blood, or even the shredded remains of those they love, saying, "Hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakil, Hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakil." Allah is sufficient for us, and He is the best disposer of affairs. The name of God on their tongues in their darkest moments, and before they have begun to process their immense loss. They have given up on their fellow Arabs and their fellow Muslims, on humanity to come to their rescue and stop the slaughter, and know that it is God alone who is just and powerful. The terror that the people of Gaza have endured is unspeakable, and it will take generations to recover. But these past 2 years have made me think about something else too. What does bearing witness do to us? It can feel unbearable to hold this much grief, especially when we're so powerless, or when we feel powerless. The physician Dr. Gabor Mate, who survived the Holocaust as a baby and who's spoken out against the Gaza genocide, says, quote, "It's impossible to have your eyes open and not to have your heart broken. And if your heart is broken, that's a tribute to you." Our faith similarly teaches us that the heart that trembles in compassion is the one that's closest to God. At the beginning of the genocide, a colleague of mine texted me, someone who isn't Muslim. He said he'd never seen the prayer room at Al Jazeera so full. People's instinct was to turn toward Allah, to find comfort and meaning in prayer. We also saw non-Muslims embracing Islam because they were moved by the Palestinian people, who have shown us again and again that their faith is the source of their steadfastness and their resilience. A friend of mine who's not religious went to Gaza twice during the genocide, and when I asked her what was an untold story from there, in her opinion, she said, quote, "The power of Islam. People's faith is the only anchor they have. They have no home. They've lost their family, friends, job, and future. Their past has been obliterated. Faith is their biggest anchor, and it has brought people together." That kind of strength is both humbling and inspiring, but I also worry what happens when we attribute it to some superpower that Palestinians have, an unending well of resilience, And then we expect people to keep surviving without our help. Faith isn't meant to replace action. It's what gives action purpose. It's what should push us to ease suffering, to speak out, to rebuild. And part of that action means naming the systems and ideologies that make this possible. The genocide in Gaza was driven by a violent settler colonial ideology that dehumanizes Palestinians, justifies their dispossession, and treats their very existence as a threat. And it was sustained by a regime that has operated for decades with impunity, shielded from accountability by the United States. As Americans, and especially as American Muslims, we have a special responsibility. This genocide simply could not have taken place without our government's political cover, its weapons, and our tax dollars. And it's important for all of us to remember that the dehumanization of Palestinians doesn't stop with the Palestinian people. It fuels the dehumanization of Muslims and others everywhere. And while we don't need oppression to affect us directly before we take action, it's imperative that we recognize that what happens to Palestinians in Gaza and in the West Bank will inevitably come back to haunt us here at home. For many of us, the real test of faith right now isn't whether we believe in God. It's whether we still believe in humanity and justice and mercy after watching the world fail catastrophically. And maybe the way back starts by grounding ourselves again in our faith, in our community, in our values. Too many in our community believe that it's acceptable to betray our values for the sake of power or even proximity to power. Or they believe that committing to your principles is a sign of weakness or naivete. We must reject that with every fiber of our being. And we must also refuse to become numb to suffering or to look away. We must hold on to the courage to speak even when it's risky. It's important to acknowledge that in these difficult times, we've seen glimmers of light. The students who organized, the doctors who volunteered in Gaza, including some from California, the journalists who refused to be silent even when they and their family members were attacked, the people in this room who kept showing up, donating, marching, organizing, holding your local officials accountable, praying, and serving your community. That's what it means to reject despair. For 77 years, Palestinians have refused to be erased or uprooted from the land. They have insisted on their right to liberation and to live in dignity, even as the world conspired against them. And maybe that's the lesson for all of us, that in times like these, holding on to our faith is resistance. Jazakumullah khair. Thank you.